The night I lost everything. I was worth nearly $3 billion. Nobody knew it. I was sitting alone on a freezing sidewalk in Manhattan, wearing a jacket I had bought for $12, with less than $20 in my pocket. People walked past me without looking twice. Some looked away. Some judged me. One woman actually stepped around me as if I were something dirty on the sidewalk. And honestly, I deserved every second of it, because I had done the exact same thing to other people. I had spent months pretending to be poor because I wanted to find out whether a woman from one of America's richest families could love a man who had nothing. I thought I was testing her. I was wrong. Life was testing me. And before that night was over, a waitress I had never met would hand me a bag of leftover food. That bag would change my life. Not because of what was inside it, but because of what it meant. She had no idea I was a billionaire. She didn't care. She didn't even know my name. She simply saw a man who was cold and hungry, and decided to help him. Years later, I would understand that she had given me something worth more than everything in my bank account. She had given me a reason to become a better man. My name is Adrian Cole. At 32, I own one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. I had luxury homes, private investments, a garage full of cars most people only see in magazines. I had assistants who handled my schedule, drivers who opened doors for me, and people who knew my name before I ever introduced myself. The media called me a self-made billionaire. But behind all of that was a question I could never silence. If all of this disappeared tomorrow, who would still want me? That question became louder after my father suffered a massive stroke. My father was the man who had built our family fortune from nothing. He had started with an empty bank account and a borrowed office. He had slept on a friend's couch. He had worked through nights when he couldn't afford dinner. And somehow, he had built an empire. But when I sat beside him in that hospital room, he didn't talk about the empire. He didn't talk about money. He kept looking at an old photograph of my mother. My mother had died when I was young. She had married my father before he had become wealthy, before the mansions, before the private jets, before anyone knew his name. She had loved him when he was broke. And that was the part of their story I couldn't stop thinking about. My father couldn't say much anymore. But one evening, I looked into his eyes and understood what he wanted for me. He wanted me to find someone who could love me before she knew what I owned. Someone who would see Adrian the man, not Adrian the billionaire. So I made a decision that would eventually turn my entire life upside down. I disappeared. I handed control of my company to my board. I locked away my expensive clothes. I stopped using my private jet. I sold nothing. I gave up nothing permanently. But for the first time in my adult life, I lived as if I had nothing. I rented a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood. I bought an old phone. I grew out my beard. I started wearing secondhand clothes. And I created a fake identity. Daniel Reed, 32 years old, unemployed, deep in debt after a failed investment. No family money, no connections, no future anyone could see. Then I chose the woman I wanted to test. Victoria Harrington. She was beautiful, educated, confident, and born into extraordinary wealth. Her father owned a massive real estate company. Victoria had grown up around private clubs, luxury vacations, expensive restaurants, and people who treated money like air. I had met her several times before. At first, I was attracted to her. Then I saw something that made me question everything. It happened at a private event. A waiter accidentally placed a drink in the wrong spot. It was a tiny mistake. Nobody else cared. Victoria did. I watched her expression change. I watched the waiter apologize. I watched him lower his eyes. And I watched her treat him as if he were invisible. That moment stayed with me. I started wondering what would happen if she met someone she believed was beneath her. So I became that man. The first time Victoria saw Daniel Reed, I was standing outside an upscale restaurant. My jacket was old. My shoes were worn. My hair was messy. I looked like a man who had been losing at life for a long time. Victoria walked out with her friends. She saw me. Her eyes moved from my shoes to my jacket, then to my face. The look lasted maybe 3 seconds. But I understood it immediately. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a poor man. And that was enough. One of her friends laughed. Victoria didn't defend me. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She simply walked away. I stood there watching her disappear into a luxury SUV. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pain. Real pain. I told myself it didn't matter. I reminded myself that this was a test. I reminded myself that I was worth billions. But none of that changed how small I felt in that moment. I kept going. I saw Victoria again. And again. Every encounter made the truth clearer. She liked people who could give her something. Status, connections, money, influence. The more I appeared to struggle, the less she respected me. Then came the night that broke whatever remained of my illusion. Victoria was hosting a private party at her family's mansion. I was there as Daniel. Nothing more. The house looked like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, champagne flowing through the room. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Everyone looked perfect. Everyone belonged. Except me. I stood near the edge of the room. Victoria noticed me. She looked embarrassed that I was there. Her friends gathered around her. I didn't need to hear what they were saying. Their laughter told me enough. I suddenly felt like an intruder in my own world. And then I realized something. I wasn't angry because Victoria thought I was poor. I was angry because I had wanted her to prove me wrong. I had wanted her to be different. She wasn't. So I left. I walked out into the cold Manhattan night. I didn't call my driver. I didn't call my assistant. I didn't use my credit card. I simply walked. Eventually, I found myself sitting on a sidewalk outside a restaurant. My hands were freezing. My stomach was empty. And for the first time, there was nobody around me who knew who I was. Nobody cared. Nobody knew I owned a billion-dollar company. Nobody knew I could buy the building across the street. Nobody knew my name. I was just another struggling man sitting on the sidewalk. Then the restaurant door opened. A young woman stepped outside. She was wearing a server's uniform. Her blonde hair was pulled back. She looked exhausted. She had clearly been working for hours. She noticed me. I expected her to walk past. Instead, she stopped. She looked at me. Then she looked at the food she was carrying. And she came closer. She placed a small bag beside me. There was leftover pasta inside. She added a bottle of water. Then she walked back toward the restaurant. I stared at the bag. Something about that moment broke through me. She didn't know me. She didn't need anything from me. She wasn't impressed by me. She wasn't afraid of me. She didn't even know whether I had $10 or $10 million. She simply saw someone who was hungry. Her name was Emily Carter. I didn't know that yet, but I would soon learn that Emily worked 6 days a week. She lived in a small apartment with her mother. Her mother was sick. Emily paid most of the bills. She was tired almost all the time. And despite having so little, she still found ways to give. That night, I ate the pasta she had given me. It was simple, nothing special, but I remember every bite. Because it was the first meal anyone had given me in years without expecting something in return. I went back the next day, then the day after that. At first, I told myself I was just curious. That was a lie. I wanted to see her. Emily never treated me like a charity case. She treated me like a person. When I found temporary work, she was happy for me. When I failed, she didn't judge me. When I got sick, she left medicine outside my door. When I couldn't afford groceries, she quietly brought food. She never made me feel ashamed. And somewhere along the way, something inside me changed. I stopped thinking about Victoria. I stopped thinking about the test. I stopped thinking about whether I was going to prove my point. I started thinking about Emily. Her smile. Her kindness. Her tired eyes. The way she remembered small things about me. The way she could make a terrible day feel less terrible simply by being there. And then I realized something terrifying. I was falling in love. Not with a billionaire's daughter. Not with someone from my social circle. Not with someone who understood my world. I was falling in love with a waitress who thought I was broke. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I wanted to tell her the truth. But fear stopped me. Because I knew the moment she discovered who I really was, everything could change. Then Victoria came back into my life. Her father's company was trying to close a massive business deal. A deal involving one of my companies. My company. The company I had temporarily stepped away from. Victoria had no idea. She still thought Daniel Reed was nobody. Then one afternoon, she saw me with Emily. She saw us standing outside the restaurant. She saw the way Emily looked at me. And something changed in Victoria's expression. She finally realized I wasn't trying to get close to her anymore. I had chosen someone else. Someone she considered beneath her. That seemed to bother her more than anything else. But by then, I was done. I didn't want Victoria. I didn't want her approval. I didn't want her family's respect. I wanted Emily. Then everything fell apart. One evening, my old phone rang while I was with Emily. I had forgotten to turn it off. My assistant's voice came through, and my real name was mentioned. Adrian Cole. Emily froze. She looked at me. I knew immediately. The secret was over. I told her everything. I told her about the company, the money, my father, The fake identity. Victoria. The reason I had started the whole experiment. I expected anger. I expected shock. I expected questions. Instead, Emily cried. And somehow, that hurt more than anger would have. Because she wasn't crying because I was rich. She was crying because she trusted me. And I had lied to her. I watched her walk away. I wanted to stop her. Every instinct inside me screamed to chase after her. But I didn't. For once, I understood that love wasn't about getting what I wanted. It was about respecting what the other person needed. So I let her go. And then I went home. Back to my penthouse. Back to the cars. Back to the millions. Back to everything I had once believed would make me happy. It felt empty. The walls were beautiful. The furniture was perfect. The city outside was breathtaking. And I hated every second of it. Because none of it was Emily. I searched for her. Everywhere. I called people. I used every resource I had. But Emily had disappeared. Then, 1 week later, I found out where she was. A homeless shelter outside the city. I drove there alone. When I walked inside, I saw her. She was taking care of an elderly man. She looked exhausted. She looked thinner. But she was still helping people. Still giving. Still putting everyone else before herself. And in that moment, I finally understood the woman I had fallen in love with. Emily didn't need money to be generous. She didn't need power to be strong. She didn't need recognition to do the right thing. She simply had a good heart. And I knew what I had to do. I didn't try to buy her forgiveness. I didn't send her expensive gifts. I didn't ask her to come back. Instead, I used my money to help the people she cared about. I bought the shelter. I renovated it. I built a medical clinic, a kitchen, classrooms, temporary housing, a place where people without money could still be treated with dignity. I put my name nowhere. I didn't tell anyone, especially not Emily. I wanted the work to speak for itself. Months passed. Then one morning, Emily walked into the new administrative office. On the wall was an old photograph. It showed my father, my mother, and me. Emily stared at it. Then she looked at me. I stood there without the expensive suit, without security, without the image of Adrian Cole, billionaire. Just me. The same man she had met on the sidewalk. The same man she had fed when she thought he was starving. I didn't know whether she would forgive me. I didn't know whether she would walk away. I didn't know whether this was the end. Then she stepped toward me and hugged me. I froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I held her. And I cried. I had spent my entire life believing that wealth meant strength. That powerful men weren't supposed to break down. That emotions were weaknesses. But standing there in Emily's arms, I finally understood. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is admit that he needs someone. Not their money. Not their approval. Just their love. Our story wasn't suddenly perfect. It couldn't be. There were wounds that needed time. Trust that had to be rebuilt. And there were nights when Emily still struggled with what I had done. I understood. I didn't rush her. I didn't demand forgiveness. I simply stayed. Then tragedy struck again. Emily's mother died. It devastated her. I watched the woman I loved lose the person she had spent years fighting for. There was nothing I could buy to make that pain disappear. No mansion. No car. No check. So I did the only thing that mattered. I stayed beside her. I held her hand. I sat with her through the funeral. I stayed through the silent nights. I let her cry. I let her grieve. And I learned something money had never taught me. Sometimes love isn't about fixing someone's pain. Sometimes love is simply refusing to leave while they carry it. A year later, I took Emily to the little house where my father had lived before he became rich. It was one of the few places from his past that I had preserved. I showed her where my parents had started their life together. There was no mansion, no luxury, no security, just two people who had almost nothing. Yet somehow, they had everything they needed. That was the moment I finally understood my father's last lesson. He had never wanted me to test a woman's love. He had wanted me to understand it. And I had misunderstood him. I had built an entire experiment around fear. Fear that someone might love me for my money. Fear that I wasn't enough without it. Fear that people would leave if they saw the real me. But Emily had already answered the question. She had loved Daniel when she thought he was broke. She had cared about him when she thought he had failed. She had walked away when she discovered the lie. And eventually, she came back because she saw that I had changed. Not because I was rich. Not because I could give her anything. Because I had finally learned how to give without expecting something in return. A few months later, we got married. The wedding wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. There were no celebrities. No giant press event. No endless line of luxury cars. Just the people who mattered. I remember watching Emily walk toward me in her white dress. The sunlight came through the trees behind her. Everything around me became quiet. And I realized something. I had spent years searching for someone who would love me without my money. But I had been looking in the wrong places. The woman I needed had been standing outside a restaurant all along. She had no idea who I was. She didn't care. She had simply seen a hungry man on a cold sidewalk and chosen kindness. That was the moment I understood what wealth could never teach me. A person who truly loves you doesn't fall in love with your house. They don't fall in love with your car. They don't fall in love with your bank account. They fall in love with the person sitting behind all of those things. After we got married, I changed. Not because Emily demanded it, because I wanted to. I spent more time working on charitable projects. We opened more shelters. We funded medical care. We helped families find housing. Emily became deeply involved in everything we built. And somehow, the woman who had once worked double shifts just to pay the bills became the heart of an organization helping thousands of people. But she never changed. She still loved simple meals. She still baked on weekends. She still remembered the names of people at the shelters. She still cried when she saw a child receive something they desperately needed. And I loved her more every day. Years later, I stood by the window of our home and watched Emily playing in the backyard with our children. I looked at them. Then I looked at the city beyond the glass. And I remembered that cold night. The sidewalk. The old jacket. The empty stomach. The bag of pasta. The woman who stopped. I wondered what would have happened if she had walked past me. What would have happened if she had judged me the way everyone else had? What would have happened if she had cared about money instead of people? I don't know. And I don't want to know. Because that night taught me the most important lesson of my life. I had spent billions trying to protect myself from people who wanted my money. But the woman who saved me had nothing to gain from knowing who I was. She simply saw someone who needed help. And she helped him. I thought I was pretending to be poor to test someone else. But in reality, I was the one being tested. And I failed. I failed when I judged Victoria. I failed when I lied to Emily. I failed when I believed money could protect me from heartbreak. But somehow, I still won. Not because I kept my fortune. Not because my company became bigger. Not because I ended up with more money than I started with. I won because I found the one thing money had never been able to buy. A woman who loved me when she thought I had nothing. A woman who saw me before the billionaire. Before the cars. Before the penthouse. Before the millions. She saw me. Just me. And she loved that man. I once pretended to be broke to find out who would love me for who I really was. Instead, I discovered something far more important. You don't find real love by testing people. You find it by becoming someone worthy of being loved. And sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the person standing under a chandelier in a $1 million mansion. Sometimes she's the woman standing outside a restaurant after a 12-hour shift. The woman carrying a $10 bag of food. The woman who sees a stranger sitting alone in the cold and stops. That bag of food didn't save my life because of what was inside. It saved my life because, for the first time, someone gave me something without asking what I could give back. And even now, after everything I've built, I still remember the feeling of holding that bag in my hands. It was worth less than $10. But to me, it was worth more than $3 billion. Because that night, a waitress gave a billionaire the one thing his fortune could never buy. A reason to believe and love again.